Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the America House virtual floor. My name is Lucy Zoria, and I'm the program manager here at America House. Today, we have a very exciting session for you because it is our favorite season. It is spooky season. Halloween is just around the corner, and we have a really special guest to usher this new wave of spookiness in. And with us today is Scott Whitmore.
Hello, everyone.
He is a great friend of ours from the U.S. Embassy here in Kiev, and he also has a connection to the spookiest town in America.
Yes, I'm proud to be connected to Salem, Massachusetts. So thank you for inviting me here. And even though it's an interesting coincidence, I guess. Maybe I was called here because of my connections. I don't know. But I do have a lot of connections with Salem, Massachusetts, a lot of family connections, and I'd be happy to go through some of those today. And I try not to bore you with the history of the place, but it's an important place. It is spooky, and it's spooky for a reason, and there's reasons that hundreds of thousands of people come to Salem every year. Should I get into it, or should I start, I guess?
Yeah, sure,
okay,
Scott, take us through.
Well, I mean, I guess the thing I would say is I'm a son of a witch, and I say that in all pride. I have connections on both sides. Oh, there's Salem right there. Both sides of my family. My mother and my father are from Salem. So my mother is technically a witch. That's what they call themselves in high school. So that's what I mean. She's not really a witch, although I probably called her that when I was younger. Sorry, Mom, I didn't mean it. But I have family that still lives there. I have aunts, I have uncles. I have people that still live in friends that live in Salem. I lived in Salem. My first place that I bought in apartment I bought was in Salem. When I happened to move in, of course, on Halloween Day, which is a whole story that I can tell you all about. But one of those bad decisions that you regret later in life. But yeah, so I mean, it's funny because I never really knew my family history. I just knew my parents were from Salem. But when I did the genealogy, I actually traced my roots to Salem back to about the early 1800s, 1810 or so,
Wow.
When they moved there from the area. And then kind of a horror story, kind of a gruesome story. I know this is one of my great-grandfathers, so I never met him, but I was researching it, and I'm looking through the newspapers, and I see the name John Whitmore. I say, okay, that's my grandfather. He's on the front page of the paper, and it says, man dies in horrific railroad crash, and he actually was crushed. I know it's funny and sad and horror and it's fine. We didn't know the guy, but it's so interesting that it's like basically there was like a horror story connected to my family that happened in Salem. So the connections I guess are many. We're here to talk about Salem in terms of the modern context, and I think that's important. But I also want to take a pause back, if that's okay, for the audience to kind of give the historical points of view of why Salem is the spookiest town in, because if you look at this picture here of Salem, it doesn't look spooky. It looks pleasant. It looks quintessential New England. And in fact, it is. It's an old city. It's a historic city. So it goes back to 1626. So, Pilgrims came in 1620. 6 years later, we have Pilgrims, we have Puritans, we have people, Americans, colonists living in Salem. It's an important port city. Huge port city. Trade went from Salem since the 1600s. culturally, it's important. We have one of our greatest novelists, Nathaniel Hawthorne, is from Salem. So, just an important town on many levels. But you wouldn't think spooky. So why, here's another picture of the Derby Wharf area. So lovely, lovely little town. I should note, all roads lead to Kiev or Ukraine. There is a big connection. There is a connection between Ukraine and Salem that many might not be aware of. A lot of immigrants came to Salem in the late 1800s, more like early 1900s, a lot from Western Ukraine and Poland. So there's a huge, at that time there was a huge population of Galician immigrants, so much that they created that church on the left, which is the Orthodox church, built in, I think, 1908, and the other one on the right is St. John the Baptist Ukrainian Catholic Church. But both exist in Salem today. They still are running. They still have many visitors from Ukraine and from Poland. So that's the connection, one of the connections with Salem and Ukraine. I don't know if you can see too much detail. This kind of gives you a sense of the area where Salem is located, and it's important because if you look up at the top, there's something called Newbury. That's where I was born. So our family kind of lived in a very small area for the entire 300-400 years. So haven't traveled very far. Is basically what I wanted to say. So one point, and the reason I wanted to stop and do a little history is besides all those cultural things, Salem is spooky because of the Salem witch trials. And if you haven't heard about this, do yourself a favor and read about it. I can't go into all the details, but it's a super famous, super important story. And the short story is back in 1692, very puritanical, very religious times. People were worried about witchcraft. Witchcraft was considered an actual threat to societies, and it was a law on it, banning it, and it was something taken very seriously. And so 1692, a hysteria takes place where some girls start accusing others of possessing them and casting spells on them. Long story short, by the end of it, you have hundreds of people that are accused of witchcraft, innocent people, and then 19 of them are killed. And most people think they were burned, burn the witches at the stake. None of them were burned, but 19 innocent women and children, mostly women, men and women, mostly women, were hung. One was pressed to death by stones. I know, a horrific story, but it's important to note because that's why Salem is considered the spooky town. I mean, it's the Salem witch trials that gives birth to today's concept of what the witches of Salem. And so here we have a depiction, a poster, a painting from the 1800s showing sort of the fervor and the accusations that were going on at the time. I'm not sure if there's a picture. Yeah, here's another picture of the house of one of the people that was accused. The only lasting picture of someone that was accused and actually killed. This house still exists in the nearby town of Danvers, which is where most of the trial took place. Interesting note. But okay, we switched it up. So that's sort of the history of it. 1692. Later, there was a reconciliation where people that were accused of witchcraft, were exonerated, even though they were killed. But it's tragic. At the end of the day, a lot of history there. People still go to Salem for the history. So you can go to Salem. Highly recommended, obviously. You can go there for the history, but you can also go there for the fun and the reveling and the party, which is what it's become today, as I can attest to. Oops, there's my microphone. Yeah, this is an interesting statue. Bewitched was a very popular TV show in the 60s in America, and she was a witch from Salem, and they filmed a few episodes in Salem. So that increased the popularity of Salem, I guess, quite a bit. And she was the Samantha the Witch from that show is there. This is a really, I would walk by this cemetery every day because it's right in the center of town and you can't avoid it. And it's actually interesting. It doesn't show on this picture, but there's a house that's not period. It was just right next to it, and it was like run down, and it looked so scary, like something from like a horror movie set. We had that and this rundown house with like usually like one light on, and I was always like scared to walk by it. I mean, Salem, living there was interesting because just on a regular day, it's lovely and whatnot, but there are some strange people that seem to gravitate there. I'm not going to lie. I mean, not my relatives or anything, or no offense to the people of Salem, but there are some strange people. Interesting story. When I moved there, my wife, who's originally from Russia, she found a job working in a cafe there. Her first job was working there, and she had so many stories of strange people coming in and visiting, and I'm just like, this is your introduction to America, this kind of strange. But this is the burial ground that's right in the middle of the town. Now what you get, this is the same street that we saw in the beginning. This is Essex Street that runs through the center of the city. Now you have hundreds of thousands. I think each year, pre-COVID, you have like 300,000 people come for all sorts of parades and festivals, and and the whole town is like chock-a-block full of tarot card readers, and fortune tellers, and a whole host of things. You have the museums. Some of them are cheesy. I don't know if you understand that word. Cheesy is like, how would you say that in Ukraine? I don't know, like very kind of touristy, I guess, and not very historic. Some of them are actually very well run and very historic, and so there's a combination. You'll have pirate museums and things that have nothing to do with the Salem witch trials, but anyone's just to make some money from the tourists that come there. But this is one of the museums that's right there in the center, that about 200 yards from where I used to live. And let's see, this is the very famous house, House of Seven Gables, which was later the novel title for Nathaniel Hawthorne's, one of his most famous works. And it's a very historic period piece. This is sort of very period, what the houses looked like back in the 1600s, and it's kept the same detail from that period of time. Another house that's very period, that is from that time period. You can see very low. If you look inside, like the walls are very, they're under, 1.6 height, 1.7, because people were just smaller and not as big, so very compact. But this was owned by one of I believe one of the lawyers, not the lawyers, the judge who served on the trials, on the witch trials. Oops, and that's it. We're done. I think I killed it. I mean, again, that's kind of the brief, the overview of it. I mean, my personal experiences there were great. I loved it. I mean, Salem is like 20 minutes north of Boston. So if you're going to Boston, if you're in Boston, it's a 20-minute train ride, very convenient. One of the few, moving around by train in America can be difficult. The connection between Boston and Salem is super easy, so I highly recommend it. If not just for the Salem witch trials and the history, just to see a very, very typical but quintessential New England port city. It's highly recommended. Good food, good everything, good people. Slightly weird, but it's a 20-minute trip. So I don't know. I'm not sure what else I could enlighten you with. I was never scared to live in Salem, I guess. I didn't see any witches per se. I did see a lot of strange people walking down and kind of doing, and as Halloween would approach, the weirdos would kind of come out of the woodwork, as we say, which is an expression. They sort of start to appear out of nowhere, and you get more and more kind of people that like to dress up. Like, you had a lot of, people that would dress like the devil, or they would, it's very popular among some people to put actually implant horns in your skull and split your tongue. And so you'd see those people. And there's one person that had bought a church and converted into Satan's, keep or something. So it was, all that kind of stuff. You have to kind of accept it. And, but it's interesting though, the city itself was back in, 30 years ago, was really kind of not doing so well. So to see it kind of reborn and kind of come back to life, just not only as a tourist city, but as a city and as a place to go, it's kind of great to see, because for a long time people were kind of leaving the city, and so that's good to see. But yeah, that's it. That's my story. Hopefully it was interesting. But I mean, I'd like to hear your questions, or anybody else's questions.
I mean, thanks for giving us this overview of Salem, and now I think we can really go deep into the meaty questions and discuss them. And just a reminder to everyone watching, please send in your questions to Scott about Salem, New England, any anything that strikes your fancy. And it would be great, actually. You said that you moved in on Halloween, and you had a funny story. So what was that?
Well, it's funny to me. It's tragic. I don't know. Maybe it's a horror story, actually. I mean, Salem itself is not easy to get into. It's kind of on a peninsula. I don't know if you can bring up that map, but it's very hard to get to. And so on a normal day with traffic, so we bought the place, and I wanted to fix it as soon as possible. So, brilliant me said, well, I'm going to go to the store and get paint and other things. And, regardless of the fact that there's 100,000 people that are all trying to get into the city on that time. So, the story is, again, it's a horror story from a traffic standpoint, because what should have taken 5 minutes ended up taking me like an hour and a half to kind of, maneuver and try to find a back way into the whole place and kind of, go through all the crowds and not hit anyone and not, it's funny in the sense, looking back, like, why would I do that? Why would I just not enjoy the time? But, you do it. You're so excited to live there and to be, and the place was right downtown, like literally where our apartment is and where the parades are and where all the other things are. It's 2 steps. Like, you can't avoid, so it wasn't like on the outskirts it was like right in the middle of the city. So yeah, it was not the best story, but it was kind of my connection with Halloween and Salem. And, we would go out, my wife and I would go out, but only Halloween is really more, it's 2 things. There's one for partying if you're like 20 or in college, I think, and it's good for kids to go trick-or-treating. And if you're kind of a little bit older, which I was like, I don't know, I wasn't really down with the whole making a fool of yourself. So we kind of just would try to hide away from the crowds that were outside of the door, but you could always hear them, and you could always see people kind of walking by the apartment, So.
Super. So Halloween in Salem is very loud, and are there, I don't know, sacrifices going on until the morning, people shrieking into the night?
I think it's gotten more crazy from what I hear. It's been a number of years since I lived there. Sacrifices, I don't think there's sacrifice. I hope not. There's certainly screaming. So what they're doing and what's causing them to scream, I don't know. I don't ask. They could be sacrificing people. I don't know. But there's certainly, when we went back a few years ago, just on a regular day, the amount of tourists and the amount of people there was like 10 times what it was when we lived there, which was like 20 years ago. So I think it's only gotten more popular in the last 20 years. So I can only imagine that the things, the parades and everything. And you're right. It's funny because some of the locals will complain that Salem is not what it used to be, and it's I don't know. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, people are going to go and visit and do what they're going to do, and the city benefits, I guess, from all the tourism that comes there. So it's a win, I guess.
It's so interesting, what you said about the locals. We actually have a question from Diana. Are people in Salem mostly religious?
Well, that's a good question. Historically, super religious. I mean, it was. I mean, and that's kind of the key thing that I kind of didn't really mention was, why is it Salem witch trials important to know about it? Because it's really the story of America. Because it was. Most of the colonies, or all the colonists, the early ones, were Puritans or Pilgrims, and the Pilgrims, the Puritans were people who came from England in pursuit of not religious tolerance, but tolerance for their very particular type of religion. And most people would not like, if you met a Puritan today, you probably wouldn't like them. They were pretty strict. They were very severe. They were very, this is how it's supposed to be. So back in the day, everyone was very religious. And that's what kind of brought out the witchcraft, because it was almost sort of a sign of, we're doing our things right because the devil wants to take us over because we're so righteous and we're so religious. So there's a lot of, the devil and religion and Puritanism were very interconnected, and they were sort of looked at as like chosen people. Today, like most of the United States, certainly religion in America is still important. I'm sorry, America is a religious, relative to other countries, I think still has many people that associate with religion. You could not say that, excuse me, Salem of today is like the Salem of the 1600s. Just nothing is like, very few places in America is that strict and that sort of Puritan and that sort of religious, fixated on one religion. So yeah, to answer your question, no, there are churches. People still go. A lot of people still go to church. I wouldn't say, I don't know what the numbers are, but no, there are church services and people go to church there. So yeah, there is that dichotomy, I guess, of the religious people that are still living there, along with the sort of Satan kind of, not admiration, but celebration, I guess. So I think there's some friction there amongst some of the religious groups. But for the most part, people look at Halloween as just a commercial kind of activity and a fun time to trick or treat and get candy and all that.
Well, yeah, more, I would say, secular than a religious event for anyone in particular these days.
Yeah, well, I mean, Halloween, that's All Saints Day. That's a whole nother discussion. I mean, there was never a connection. They didn't celebrate it like that back in the Puritan times. They were not celebrating trick-or-treating and all that stuff. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But it's so interesting. I find it's such a fascinating discussion in general about how those very early traits of the communities, how much they actually formed the modern history of America.
Yeah.
All of the migrants who came from Europe, they were seeking a new free life and a kind of place for self-expression, which was not necessarily possible for them at a time in Europe. And a lot of these groups were actually fringe groups, like you said, like very fervent religious groups, or highly individualistic people. And it's kind of melded into the DNA of the U.S. in many ways.
I mean, that's absolutely a great point. I mean, the story of America is written in great part in Salem, because the Puritans were really responsible for what we think of as the American work ethic, the hard work, the individualism, do it yourself, the fear of God. So a lot of those traits of independence and the things that we associate with American was created there and started there from that moment. It obviously went wrong with the witch hunts, which was actually a learning point for America, because up until then in our history we were looking at not a theocracy, but religion. We have our documents of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. It's freedom of religion. That's not what the Puritans, and everybody kind of thinks that, well, the Puritans came for freedom of religion. No, they came for their religion. What actually shifted the debate in the United States was, in a great part, was the Salem witch trials, because they said, wow, wait a minute, this mass hysteria that we created because of our fervor belief in the religion, 19 people, innocent people, ended up dead. So a lot of rational people, not that the Puritans weren't rational, but a lot of people that were not as, in part of the Puritan kind of in deep with that mindset, were able to step back and say, wait a minute, we need to kind of analyze how we look at ourselves, and what is the role of religion in our culture, in our politics. And so it actually created a break between the government and the religion that we have, which is sort of a bedrock of what we have today. But you wouldn't think of that in 1600s, because of, again, the Pilgrims, the Puritans, they came to create their own religious sort of world, free from other people's influence. So, and then another great point, I mean, all the immigrants that came later on in the 1800s then added a whole nother level of, that melting pot salad bowl experience, and that real kind of flavor that I really appreciate about America. And even today, you can still see, there's a Polish store right down the street. There's the churches that are in Salem. One of the street's names is Kosciuszko, who was this Polish patriot who fought. So there's a lot of connections, and you still see the imprint of the immigrants that came and traveled from across the ocean and sacrificed a lot for a new beginning, and made that beginning in Salem and made it their home. So yeah, both my father and mother's side are Polish immigrants. So I feel that story close to my heart, and it makes the story of Salem all that much more interesting when you go beyond just the obvious Halloweens and the witches. There's a nice story behind there of all the immigrant influence. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Diana, for this excellent question. It really, put us into this deep discussion. But in general, I didn't realize that Salem was so close to Boston, actually. And in general, New England is just, I think, one of the most important places in American history in general. Just everything that happened in Boston, the fight for America's independence. It's really fascinating, and it's great to see that Salem as well, had its part to play, not only in this horrific incident, I would say.
Yeah, no, Salem is at the center of a lot of things. There's, going back into the beginning of, again, it was one of the earliest cities, 1626. There's a lot of connections to Salem. It's, it is part of New England, which again is, I don't know if you're not aware, it's the 6 states of New England are Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. Is that 6 or 7? Oops, could be 7. But it's a unique part. I think, and a lot of people, when I hear them going to the United States, they'll say, "Oh, I'm going to New York, I'm going to Florida, I'm going to Chicago," all great places. But I always recommend coming to New England because there's a lot of connections to Ukraine, but it's just an interesting, it's really where the country formed, was the beginning of the country is where you can see a lot of those elements there, and even today you can still, like cities, towns are formed around what they call a common, which is a very interesting, not unique to the United States, but very unique to the way it looks in New England, because they still exist, and it was this common area in the center. Salem has one, and it was the common area where people that were newly arrived could have their animals graze and all that, and it later became a meeting ground for militias going off to war. So it's and you'll still see them in towns today, 300 years later. So very interesting architecture and interesting history. So highly recommend.
Fascinating. We have a question from Tanya. There are some movies about Salem, but where have they been shot in Salem? Do you often see filmmakers in the city?
Yeah, there are actually sometimes. Well, Salem today is not Salem of 1692. So if they're doing a period piece, there is actually a recreated village in Salem that is used for a site, like some period houses. Oh, wow. Yeah, and I think they filmed. The Crucible is probably the most famous novel or play. Sorry, it's a play by Arthur Miller from the 50s, which is an interesting story I could talk about. But then they made a movie, I think, with not Johnny Depp, but recently, within like the last 20, 30 years, they made a movie. But they film a lot of movies are filmed. I think, there was a movie about witches with Bette Midler that was filmed. Hocus Pocus. Yeah. That was filmed, I think, in Salem. You see them. Movies in general are filmed around there. Like there was a movie about Manchester by the Sea that was filmed. Manchester by the Sea is 5 minutes up the road from Salem. So they'll use Salem and cities around Salem for if you want that historic looking New England seaport look, they'll use places, either Salem or surrounding cities, because they're very port, on the ocean, very similar looking, very unique architecture that tells a story of easily people in the United States and elsewhere can say, this is America, this is New England, this is the ocean. It's very obvious when you film in those locations that you get a certain look, and it's easy to do that in filming in Salem. Yeah.
It's fascinating just how, you talk about this renaissance that's been seen in the last 30 years and how much has changed. And I think that, my personal opinion is that so much of it is actually tied to pop culture and just the amount of films that have been shot about Salem, how even if films are not, done there specifically, but they just mention it in the lore, we have kind of those classic films, and we have also, modern stories like Sabrina the Teenage Witch. They had a whole updated version of it, which was very spooky, and it was all of it is around this Salem. So it's definitely a subject that captivates so many people. But I don't know if at what point did teaching about the witch trials become a part of the American school curriculum?
Well, I think from an early, I mean, from as long as we've had public education, I think it was, because it happened, public education in the United States came about in the 1800s, early 1800s, if I'm not mistaken. I apologize if I'm wrong, but at a very early time in our development, and that was a time in America where we were defining who we were. We were still creating the narratives and the myths that every country has. Not myths in the sense of made up stuff, but the stories that we tell about ourselves and the narratives. And I think it was so recent in the history, and such a big impactful moment. Because people, innocent people dying. That's a big deal. I mean, we kind of write it off and say, oh, Salem witch trials. Even when I lived there, I didn't really think about the weight of that. But just a society that would say, you 20 innocent people, we're going to kill you. That's pretty shocking, So, and especially in a country that kind of prides itself in the rule of law and the process of a jury and all those things. So all those things combined, I think it was important to make sure that everyone understood. Everyone understands. Every school child knows the story or is taught it. It's part of the curriculum. The Crucible is one of the most. It's almost always given as a reading assignment in either middle school or high schools for American students, because it's not only the story of the Salem witch trials, but the story behind the Crucible was written in the 1950s, when we had in the United States what we called McCarthyism, which was the Red Scare. I'm not sure if you know this, or the listeners online, but in the 1950s, the height of the Cold War, everyone was worried about communism. That was the big threat. That was the witch. Those were the witches of the 20th century, the mid 20th century. So what happened was there became a witch hunt, which is a term looking for people that were communist and that were sympathetic to the communist cause. And what ended up happening, led by this congressperson, Joe McCarthy, created the Red Scare, where people were saying, you're a communist, and many innocent people were kicked out of Hollywood, were banned from writing, from jobs. It was horrible. It was basically it was a modern witch hunt. And so Arthur Miller saw this, and he said, I think we need to refresh everybody's memories about what happens when mass hysteria takes over and we start losing rule of law, and we start losing our logic and our reason, and we let our emotions and fear take over. And it's still something that resonates today. I mean, we saw it after 9/11. We see it, with issues today where we don't, it's not to say that, there aren't valid things to be worried about, but when you talk about, innocent people can get caught up in some of these hysterical moments without, us even realizing it. And we all say we're not going to do it again, but then we end up doing it again. And so, they say history repeats itself, but it always bears remembering, where we come from, our history, and what can happen when people get out of control with their kind of hysterical, topic of the day. So it's not just Salem witch hunt. It's not just 1692. It's communism, 1950s. It's terrorism and 9/11. It's other things that are happening today where you have to be careful. Yes, you want to root out evil and get the bad guys, but let's not throw away the innocent people in the process of it. So
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating, and I think this is just a trait of humans, unfortunately, and it can definitely be found in any culture in the world. And it's so interesting how in America there was this specific moment that can be used kind of as a cultural and social reference to this behavior in societies, and that can be used as a teaching example moving forward. And that was actually used and with ways that it really draws in the attention. So really an image with a lot of longevity. And we actually have a comment from Diana. I was surprised the once most superstitious city is located right next to Boston, the cradle of modern science. Kind of ironic.
Well, yeah, I mean, here's a fun, I mean, I don't want to get too nerdy historical, But it's a very interesting story. If you're history buffs that want to dig really deep, there was a guy named Cotton Mather who was the lead. He was a religious leader. He was a spiritual leader for the time, and his father ran Harvard. Was a president of Harvard, which existed back then. It's an old college, college then, university now. Anyway, so he was one of the guys pushing the witchcraft and pushing this idea that there was evildoers and that there were the witchcraft. So he's on one hand very Puritan, very spiritual, very religious. At the same time, he was one of the early adopters, and this is very timely for COVID today. He was one of the first people who studied and actually supported this idea of inoculations and vaccinations, which was not common back in 1692. It was looked at as like, that medicine back then was, like candles and, bloodletting and cutting. So this person who on one hand was very spiritual, on the other hand was very scientifically prone to and he was written up and given awards for his scientific pursuit. So very interesting. Yeah, that's a good comment that you have that juxtaposition of, very irrational letting emotions and you're letting your fervor of religion take over, but at the same time also being logical and scientific and going step by step. I mean, Boston is an area of kind of oxymorons and not hypocrisies, but things that don't, on the one hand, Boston is a very worldly city with a lot of institutions. On the other hand, Boston has a history of being very limited in their view of other people from outside of Boston. I'll leave it at that. I'll be polite and diplomatic. You can do your own history. I love Boston, but historically, there was, at one hand, can be looked at as like a world, international kind of cosmopolitan city, but on the other hand, it's very parochial and very limited in the view and very kind of introspective. So I love it. I accept it for what it is, but it can be confusing to people looking at that area and not really understanding how the two can exist hand by hand. So very, very good comment. And good,
it's a complicated place, but that makes it good and fascinating.
Yeah.
We have a question from Chris. Does the word witch mean wise woman? Do you know?
I don't know. That's a good question.
You have to do some research.
Yeah, I think witch, in the definition of witch, you'll see it in different usage, but from Shakespeare throughout, it's someone of, usually diabolical, or looking to do evil things. But I'm not sure. There's also good witches that we have in
Glenda.
Yeah. Thank you.
From the Wizard of Oz,
Wizard
right?
of Oz, yeah. We have good witches. Are you a good witch or a bad witch? So I don't think witch necessarily means bad. I don't know if it means wise person. I was thinking actually, on the way over today, in New England we use the word wicked a lot. And I was wondering, I myself am wondering if there's a connection between wicked, because in New England we'll say wicked awesome. And very few people from other parts of the country will say, like, what does that mean, wicked? Wicked awesome. Like that's something like a local vernacular. And I wonder if it has any connection with wicked, meaning originally wicked was like evil or kind of a wicked witch. The wicked witch, the evil witch of the West is what wicked means, but it can also mean like super or like, I don't know what the Ukrainian equivalent is, but class or something, very cool or very intensifier. So I don't know. But I don't know. I don't know the answer. Sorry.
Yeah, but that's really interesting. I think, again, the image of a witch, all of the ideas that we put behind it, whether it's a good witch or a bad witch, an evil witch, it's basically someone with supernatural powers.
Right.
And this is, again, a phenomena that can be found globally.
Yeah.
I would be surprised if there is a single culture on Earth that does not have this in some capacity, like either shamans or healers or warlocks, just in any capacity. So maybe in some language, I would not be surprised if it actually means wise person.
Yeah, it could be, because they have that sort of connection to another world or some sort of a higher power, a higher learning. And you're right. I don't want to describe Salem as unique or witchcraft, because Europe, witchcraft and witch hunts in Europe were very common. by 1692, most of Europe had kind of moved on from that. They were like, okay, we had that, we've been there, done that. For whatever reason, America, we weren't ready to just let go of it. So we're not unique in the world history, but definitely, I think the learning moment is not just the witchcraft, but the actions of a seemingly normal society that went off the rails. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I mean, some of the interesting things that led to it, because I always wondered when I was a kid, they gave different reasons as to why, how did it end up that people said you're a witch? And it goes back, the story, I'll give it very short, was that it started with a few girls complaining of somebody casting spells on them and all that. And I always wondered, and the explanation that was given was, well, they were bored, or they were, they were bored, or they were mad at their neighbors, so they came up with, and I'm thinking, that doesn't really sound true. One theory I read, and it's not really supported too much, but there is some scientific support, because I like science, that around that time there was like some contaminated wheat or rye that created like hallucinations. And so there's interesting theory that some of the bread that the girls were eating, because some of the things that were being reported were like people were barking like dogs and meowing like cats, and they were seeing like lights and crawling into the fireplace. So strange things that you wouldn't, I'm thinking, why would I do that? I wouldn't do that. If I was in a society that was very religious and that looked at anybody as strange, as sort of possessed by a witch, that's the last thing that I would do, would be kind of acting out. And that's the sad thing. I mean, I want to get too historic, but most of the victims were women, and there is a genderist and a sexist and a feminist element to this, unfortunately, because back in the day, everyone believed that the devil could possess you. They also believed that women were more susceptible because they were the weaker or more, yeah. So unfortunately, there's that element of it. And so I think of the 19 that died, I think 15 were women and 4 were men. So it does kind of reveal a little bit of, obvious, not news story there, but the views about how, women were more susceptible to the powers of the devil and be able to be led into witchcraft more easily is just kind of an interesting kind of a tidbit or a side note to the witch hunt thing. But
it's so interesting. I saw some discussions around the fact that young women, many young women, seem to go through a phase where they're into witchcraft, or they're I mean, not into it, but they're fascinated by the subject, and dressing up as witches for Halloween, and it's and kind of in response to that observation, I saw the point that a witch is one of the few female figures that is actually not, she's completely self-sustained. Oh. So she's outside of this, kind of, she's independent. Right. She's not tied to a man. Yeah. And maybe this is, like, a witch is one of the few images of female empowerment that is kind of standalone. And maybe that's why, young women in particular are drawn to this image.
That's very valid, I think. I can definitely see that being again, I don't know, but that's definitely plausible. Because you're right, people that were accused of witches originally were the ones that were on the fringes of society. But if you translate that to today, if you take society as patriarchal and having to rely on men and all that, then if you're outside of that, then it's sort of a feminist statement that I don't need anyone's help, especially a man's help. That's an interesting concept, which I think, has some merit, yeah.
It's really fascinating.
I am witch, hear me roar.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And, who doesn't want to enact revenge on their enemies?
There's a lot of that, yeah.
Okay, Scott, so I'm thinking we're going to do a little bit something fun, and I'm going to ask you questions. We'll do a lightning round.
Okay.
Okay, so just whatever comes to mind. Which do you prefer? Okay, so let's go. Zombie apocalypse or supernatural haunting?
Oh, zombie apocalypse.
Really?
Totally. Yeah.
You think you could do that?
Oh, yeah. I've watched enough zombie movies. I watch Walking Dead. The only thing about with zombies is, as long as I can see everything around me, I'm fine. With Walking Dead, I always was amazed how they could be in a forest, and then within 2 seconds, there's no zombies, and then all of a sudden there's 500 zombies. You think there'd be a little bit heads up, right? And their cardio is not so good. They can't run that far. So I think I'd be better with that. Supernatural haunting, I don't know what I'm dealing with. I can't see it, can't touch it, so yeah. That's my
Tangible
answer.
versus intangible, Fred.
That's right.
Got
Zombie
it.
apocalypse.
Okay, so
Hands down.
go on a ghost tour or meet with a psychic?
Ooh, I don't believe in either. No, I think go on a ghost tour. Because I think a psychic, yeah, ghost tour.
Ghost tour.
Yeah.
Okay.
At least you learn something. I'm afraid what the psychic will tell me.
Harry Potter or Percy Jackson?
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. We have a Gryffindor somewhere in
Yeah,
the
I saw.
backstage
Yeah,
walking
yeah,
around.
Yeah.
Witches or warlocks?
Well, I know more witches than warlocks, so I think witches and, to go with the whole women's empowerment thing that we were talking about, let's go with witches. My mom's a witch. My father's not a warlock, so.
I agree. Much cooler.
Yeah.
What's scarier, climate change or a pandemic?
Wow, some would say climate change is a pandemic, but that's a tough one. Short-term pandemic, long-term, I think climate change.
Yeah.
Harder to control.
Haunted cemetery or haunted swamp? Where would you brave? What would you rather brave?
I'd rather be in a swamp. Swamp. Because cemetery, people can come up out of the grave. With swamp, I don't think many people are coming up out of the swamp. So, yeah. Cemetery.
Ghouls, mermaids,
I
man.
don't care. Yeah, frog. I don't care about frogs. I lived in a swamp when I was a kid. That was my hangout. That's where I used to play. So, yeah.
Excellent. Be scared or scare someone?
Ooh, I love to scare people. I don't do it as much as I like to, but yeah, I'm not a fan of being scared personally. I don't know if anybody is. I think I'd rather be the scarer than the scary. Yeah.
Did you play a lot of scary pranks on your kids?
I try not to mess with my kids. I torture them enough in many ways. I give them a break. I torture my father a lot with like April Fool's jokes and different pranks like that. I would kind of, because he was more gullible. It's kind of sad. Like parents always take advantage of their parents' love, and that's what I did. So I try not to do to my kids what I did to my father. So I guess that's my lesson for the day. I don't know.
I'm sure they appreciate it. Freddy or Jason?
Freddy was pretty scary. I'm gonna go with Freddy only because he could like go into your dreams and stuff. I guess, or he got into your world like no matter what you tried to do. And I never like basements and like the whole like oven, the boiler down, and like I was afraid of basements for the longest time because of that movie. Yeah, so Freddy with the whole pizza skin and the knives. Like Jason's just like a hockey goalie with a chainsaw. That's whatever. I can deal with that.
Yeah, Freddy Krueger is a really riveting villain.
Right.
And it's talked to a lot of people, and they have really vivid memories of that movie. I mean, including myself.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, for all of those watching, we are having some special events coming up with Freddy Krueger. And not only Freddy, but actually Heather Langenkamp, who was the actress in Nightmare on Elm Street.
I can't believe that. My mind flipped when I heard that. I was like, you got to be kidding me. I'm working with the guy that I thought I was done with his movie, and here I am, back in it.
Oh, it's so exciting.
It's
Heather
amazing.
is fantastic, and please join us. We're actually going to be doing an offline screening at America House of Nightmare on Elm Street, so you don't have to be alone in your room. You can share, and, as you leave America House, you can think about how, someone else, Freddy will get someone else, not necessarily you.
Oh, he'll get you.
And on Friday, we're screening a documentary that Heather did herself.
Oh.
And we'll actually do also a live Q&A with her, and she told us all about what it was like, first of all, to film that. But actually, Heather, she's done so much more after Nightmare on Elm Street. She works in she runs a company that does special effects makeup.
Cool.
And they've done a lot for American horror films.
Oh, wow.
American
Yeah,
Horror
horror
Story,
stories, yeah.
like 6 seasons of it.
Oh, wow.
They've worked on J.J. Abrams, Star Trek. So she has a lot of cool stories. So
Excellent.
I really encourage everyone to join, and you should come bring your kids. Make sure they're terrorized and wake up in the middle of the night because Freddy is coming for them.
They wake up for other reasons.
Looming
That's
deadlines.
right. Homework
School
is
paper.
coming for you.
I mean, yeah, even not, there is a lot of things to be scared of in this world.
There's too many things to be scared of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's continue. Hayride or haunted house?
Oh, well, I mean, that's easy. Hayride's like awesome. It's fun. It's great. Haunted house. I've been in a haunted house. It's not fun. So, yeah.
Didn't enjoy them as a kid?
Didn't like them. No. When you're a kid, I guess, yeah. But now that I'm, a little bit older, the hayride is just relaxing. Don't have to worry about.
Nice.
But for kids out there, yeah, the haunted house. Do they do them here? Do they have haunted houses?
We've actually done haunted houses at America House, but it's not. We should get one of those, definitely. But I wouldn't say it's a common thing here. Maybe not yet. Okay, candy corn or chocolate? Favorite Halloween treat?
Chocolate. You know what? True story. If you're talking about trick or treat, like I was a fanatic. There's an age limit. Acceptable age limit. Like 13 is pretty much the cutoff. But I think I pushed it to 13. But when I would, you take the pillowcase. That's the traditional way, and you fill it up with candy. I would dump it all out, and then I would sort it in categories. Like it wasn't just like chocolate, and it was like the big chocolate bars, and so you have like a class, and you separate and kind of get them all. And yeah, the candy corn was low on the. The worst was the raisins. I hated those people. Like I wanted sorry, I'm not condoning egging or violence, but people that give like apples or raisins or popcorn balls or something lame, they don't deserve to.
Yeah, the house that gives out fruit and healthy options is always deemed.
I took my kids recently, a couple years ago, outside of Virginia, and there was this fancy town. They had not just chocolate, but like king size. I don't know if you know, like the big size. I know. I was like, I'm looking at these kids, like, you have no idea what a special. It's ridiculous. This whole idea. I don't know what we're telling our kids. Go up to strangers, knock on their door, and ask for something. I don't know. What is that? What message are we telling people? But I guess we're teaching them how to be like panhandlers or beggars or something. I don't know. But it works.
So like 364 days out of the year, it's don't take candy from strangers. But one day a year, it's good.
Yeah, just take it. Whatever.
It's fine.
If somebody gave you something, good. Eat it. It's probably good.
I see that we have a question from Diana, and we'll get to the end of our lightning round a bit later. Are there indeed second Salemers anywhere around Salem who try to investigate witchcraft in some form?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Really?
Oh yeah, there's people that they call themselves witches or Wiccan. Yeah, that's definitely a class of people, not just in Salem, but around the U.S. that identify with this sort of, I don't know if it's a religion or if it's a belief. I think it's like more like, what do they call that? Like back to nature. Yeah, calling, but it's like, what's the word in English? Jeez, I'm blanking on it. But like something with nature, something more kind of naturalistic, with, I'm blanking on the word in English. That's terrible. I'll get it back. But yeah, there are definitely people that associate with being a witch or try to explore being a witch or witchcraft or identify as a warlock or a Wiccan. Yeah. So definitely, and there's probably more per person per capita in Salem, just because they gravitate there. And if nothing more, there's businesses that you can run that are more successful because more tourists, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Any exorcists? Holy.
Oh my God, that's a good. I just remembered that story. I don't know if you know the movie. It's not really a story, but you know the movie in the book, The Exorcist. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a famous scene. Speaking of it, where the priest gets thrown out this window and he tumbles down this big staircase, and it's in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. When I was an intern, one night I'm walking home, and I didn't even realize it, but I ended up, it was like midnight, and I'm walking up the very steps I stopped. I'm like, oh crap, this is actually where they filmed this. I was like walking up this huge staircase with. So I never saw an exorcism.
Okay, so the spookiest thing that happened to you didn't happen in Salem. It happened in D.C.
Yeah. I haven't had any. Well, I lived in a haunted house. I think I told it earlier that one of the houses that I lived in was supposedly haunted. That there would be footsteps on imprints on a freshly, vacuumed carpet.
Ah.
Yeah, and lights coming off and on, and fans spinning that nobody turned on. Yeah, just weird things like that happening. I never saw any ghosts. My brothers and sisters have seen them, but I haven't seen any.
So supposedly it was haunted, but
We'll see.
you weren't convinced.
I was on edge, but not. I didn't. No, I'm not convinced. 100%.
Maybe just the spirits didn't want to mess with you. They wanted to mess with your brothers and sisters. They were more impressionable,
Yeah,
more
I think so.
fun
Yeah.
to scare.
It's like I've seen you. Move on. That's right. Next.
Any witch hunters in your family? Spirit seances after this experience of living in a haunted house?
One of my sisters, I think, has seen more ghosts than anybody else. She seems to be most comfortable with ghosts. She lived up in Maine, up in the middle, and she apparently had ghosts that lived there. And she was like, yeah, that's how they're there. And she's just kind of nonchalant, kind of just like looking, and there's the postman, there's the ghosts. Sorry, sis, if you're listening.
That's that happens to some people. What can I
Well,
say?
no, I don't think anything happened to her. I think she just, I don't know, she believed it.
No, it's there are things in life
Who
that
am I to
are
say?
sometimes hard to explain.
I've been in rooms that I haven't felt comfortable in, and like I verified it with another sister that we both had the same feeling. Separately, we had the same feeling about this one room in one house that we were living in, and that was interesting. That we both came to the same conclusion, never having spoken about our feelings about that room until like years later. So that suggests that there's some kind of either spirit or I don't know, what have you. Anyway.
Okay, we're almost out of time, but let's continue with our lightning round.
Questions get tougher.
Never celebrate Halloween or Thanksgiving again.
Oh.
What are you willing to give up?
I'm giving up Halloween. Sorry, I love Halloween, but I mean it's okay. I like the trick or treating, I like the candy, but Halloween, Thanksgiving it's sacred.
And it has its own creepy history in some way.
Yeah, I guess, and I don't look at it as creepy as the Salem, which probably there's elements of creepiness, I guess.
Well, we'll talk about that really soon because after spooky season is Thanksgiving season. Right. So, we talked a little bit about this tangible versus intangible threats, but among these, which is the greater one? Ghost encounter or alien encounter?
What's scarier?
Yeah.
I think a ghost encounter. I think an alien encounter would be kind of awesome.
Still tangible.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly, yeah. I mean, that at least, they're like, oh, great, I'm going somewhere. That would be cool just to realize that there are aliens to confirm it. That would be neat.
Yeah.
Confirming that there are ghosts, what does that get you? Aliens at least get you off the planet or someplace else for potential. There could be downsides.
Yeah.
You could be in for like testing, and you could become like a subject of alien. But who has time for that? I'm going to go with that.
That's true. And you'll be the human to confirm there's life outside of
That's right.
there?
I don't know if it's intelligent life, but there'll be life. There's no intelligent life, yes.
Very cool. So give out candy or go trick-or-treating, which is the sweeter gig.
Well, this is like a philosophical, right, to give or to receive. I mean, the story of life is all about, changing your approach to things. When you're a kid, nobody wants to give out candy. You want to go get the candy. But when you're older, it's kind of nice to kind of relive your childhood through the eyes of the little kids that come up to your house. And what I kind of find frustrating is the little punks that come now and they just grab like 8 pieces. I just want to put a spell on them or something. To rude. You're talking to you. No. I think now I like to give out candy. Although I haven't been in a house really that is accessible easily. So that's like my one regret. Like we lived in one place in Canada, but it was like down a hill, so we like left candy out, but nobody came.
Aww.
Anyway, I think the raccoons came, not the kids. But yeah.
Well,
That's it.
Scott, that was my last question, and actually we're almost out of time. So thank you so much. This was so fun, and I've learned so much.
Well, thank you for having me. I hope everyone found it interesting. I know, again, Salem is a great town. It's fun, not just for the witches, but come for the witches and stay for the history or something like that.
Ooh, nice slogan. You should pitch it to the city.
I think, yeah, I'll try.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. This was so fun, and this is just the start of Horror Week at America House. So please join us for our other events, and it'll be such a treat for all of us to gather offline for just a couple of nights this week. So give everyone, the gift of sweets, and stay spooky out there, and just have fun. You really deserve it.
Treat yourself.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. Bye.